I think there is a data thing, which I know we're going to come on to, and systems have always been a problem ever since the FSA was created over 20 years ago with from 12, I think, predecessor organizations who all had their own ways of doing things. We talk a lot about silos. I think another way of looking at it is a sort of a group of islands, like an archipelago, and some of them have, motorway bridges between them. Some have ferries. Sometimes you need to swim across. Some of them are big, some of them are tiny. But actually making them work together in combination, linking them up, the bridges between are the really key thing in how well it works.
Common data standards is something PJ has been talking about for at least 10 years. So I felt like it was really important that having common data standards is now a policy.
Disruptive or new technologies and new businesses fit within the perimeter of the regulation. Just because it's new doesn't mean that it isn't covered by one of the old school rules.
If we've had so much trouble managing online fraud in the, as what she was calling a financial crime in the UK, imagine how difficult it is going to be as these influencers and bloggers continue to grow online.
RegCast.
Welcome to RegCast,
where we shine a light on banking digitization. Hello, I'm PJ DiGianmarino, CEO and founder of JWG, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our next edition of RegCast. Welcome back to everyone who's found us before, and welcome to those of you who find us for the first time. What we do in this show is shine a light on the key pain points for the financial services sector as we digitize. We look at the regulators, the regulated, and the tech firms, and what does it all mean to come up with to meet the challenges of this decade's transformation. Up today on the 2nd of March, we're looking at the impact of GameStop, but along with the rest of the regulatory framework that's also in play. There's an amazing confluence of looking at what has been happening with the digital regulatory system dialogue and GameStop. And in the last episode, we talked a bit about this. And we came up with the critical decisions that the UK really faces now about its regulatory framework. And how the precise data and standards really need to get written and allow the system to be overseen in a more digital and agile way. And there's been an awful lot going on this month. Walking backwards, the debate seems to have morphed into the UK financial services regulatory system as we've had testimony from the new CEO and chair of the FCA at the Treasury Select Committee yesterday. We've had the appointment of 3 new heads of the FCA last week, and the Bank of England has unveiled its new data collection strategy and transformation plan, all while a new report on the fintech policy was just issued, something called the Khalifa report. And last week, the FCA put out a rather poor report card on product governance, just as we had a press release about Neil Woodford's potential return to the sector. But while at the week before that, we had the European Parliament and the head of ESMA and the Econ Committee that set all the policies for Europe talking about GameStop. Of course, the week before that, we had the US doing pretty much the same thing. So there's a lot going on right now, and I'm really, really pleased to have these experts around the table again. Rachel, senior editor from Thomson Reuters. Hello.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you for coming back. Sam Tyfield, partner at Shoesmiths.
Hello.
Thanks.
Hi all.
And last but not least, Gavin, former regulator and senior consultant at Grant Thornton.
Hi there.
Thank you. So in this episode, what we're shining our spotlight on is really risk dashboards. There was a lot of talk about it yesterday at the Treasury Select Committee. I know everyone's itching to get into that conversation about what they mean, but essentially for me, it comes down to, are they deep enough, broad enough, and fast enough to keep up with the new digital framework that everyone wants to put on the regulatory system? I guess the first thing that we want to focus on what we learned from the Europe and the U.S. So, Rachel, what was your key takeaway? And that's a great article, which I'll link to the podcast on our website.
Thanks.
But what were some of the big things that you heard?
Well, just to lead on with the U.S. approach, it seems like now that this GameStop and Robinhood situation is being gradually uncovered, we're seeing that this is looking more like a market abuse and risk management situation there. And I think it's going to take a long time to uncover what actually happened. My big takeaway from the testimony so far was at the U.S. was that Robinhood had a problem funding its trading activities, and that's why they had to stop. And I think apart from that, we didn't really learn that much. It seems like there's going to be a lot more to digging by the SEC and the various other agencies to uncover what's been going on. So I think that story is going to run and run on that end. In the EU front, what the Econ Committee concentrated on when they were questioning Stephen Mayor from ESMA and Ugo Bassi from the Commission was kind of 4 different topics. One was the payment for order flow. One was short selling. One was market integrity in terms of price formation. And they were also just worried about and this links back to the payment for order flow, the business models of what they're calling the neo brokers. They're wondering how they make money if they're not charging customers for trades, which links back to the payment for order flow, which Sam, I'm sure, will be telling you all about. The ESMA came back and said, ESMA and the Commission came back and said, well, our dashboards tell us that we have very few stocks that are shorted here in the EU, so we're not going to have a big short selling fiasco like we did in the States. Their CCPs were holding up, and they, on the inducements front, especially Mayor, was confident that the MiFID rules around best X, inducements, and conflicts of interest should cover the the PFOF issue, payment for order flow issue. However, he did admit that these rules have been implemented differently across the EU, and they needed to check and make sure. I mean, it left a big question mark of if not PFOF, then how are these people keeping the lights on? I think that's going to be,
and I guess that's really important in light of Brexit. And Sam, let's get your view here, because PFOF isn't something that we've really adopted in the UK. What do you think this all means?
I have to this comes with a health warning that I have very specific views about payment for order flow. The first point is that the FCA has been very hot on what it is calling payment for order flow.
mm-hmm.
But that is different from the US payment for order flow situation. So in the US, payment for order flow is a retail broker bundles a bunch of retail orders, which it sends to a market maker for execution in the most appropriate manner. And the market maker pays it for that flow. In the UK, the FCA is focused on the wholesale market more than the retail market, where essentially it boils down to the same thing, that the broker is charging both the wholesale client who asks it for an execution and the market maker to which it sends the order for execution. those are not the same thing, and we need to be careful. I think we should be careful to separate out the two issues completely. I've banged on about the separation between wholesale and retail for long enough, so I won't do that again. The other point is that none of the participants in the financial services trading market, trading cycle are a public good. We all have to make a living. So if retail punters are expecting to receive brokerage services for free, seriously, are they expecting that this is actually a service that is being provided to them for free? Somebody has to keep the lights on somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And to criticize a broker who can't charge retail clients, and I say can't deliberately because there is market pressure and client pressure on brokerage rate cards to push them down and down and down and down and down. Eventually, it becomes uneconomic. Somebody wanting to buy a pint of milk has to understand that there is a chain up to the point where his little carton is sitting on in the fridge at the supermarket. If he's going to complain about the price he's paying for the milk, then it is not the retail price that is going to get knocked down. It is everyone down the chain. So we
okay, but there's still a coalition of people buying milk here, and I guess that's the new bit that's been introduced. So what does it mean to have the masses able to manipulate the price of milk now?
Well, let's assume that the masses are manipulating the price of milk, because we don't know that yet. So in the alleged theoretical situation where the masses can manipulate the price of milk, the likelihood is that a majority of the masses are, and I use it's a pejorative term, but I use it non-pejoratively, useful idiots.
That's a pejorative term.
Yeah, it's a pejorative term.
Okay.
Used with love. You know, in most mobs, there are one or two, no more than a handful of people controlling the mob. The rest go along with it. And that is I theoretically, allegedly, no, hypothetically, there is no reason why the masses wanting their milk or wanting physical silver are any different here.
All right. Well, okay. So we're on a perfect analogy here, because I must remind you, we're talking about a roaring kitty in the U.S. So we have milk, we have a kitty, and we have manipulation. Gavin,
in the silver
former
tea
regulator, what's your perspective on this, and what's happening to the risk dashboards?
Sounded a bit like we were back to the French Revolution there for a minute. So I think risk dashboards largely, largely kind of look the same, irrespective of the situation. What changes is the acuteness of the different types of risk. So when we're talking about GameStop, I think as a regulator, you're looking at things like conflict of interest, you're looking at inducements, you're looking at transparency. Those are things that are kind of ever present in most kind of financial services that we ever talk about, and it's how well they're managed and how big a deal they are in particular situations. I think the interesting GameStop stuff, which partly comes out in the article Rachel wrote, I think Matt Smith brought it up, is kind of where you have a kind of collective herd mentality at the retail end. It's Sam's mob, if you like, and what that really means. So we've not really seen that in the UK before. It's clearly happened in the US. Working assumption at some point it will get to us. I don't think our regulation is set up for that. I think the influencer's role in the US is quite interesting as well. I don't know where that fits in MiFID.
I don't know either.
Someone else might tell me, but so I think there are definitely things to look at, but I think that the kind of the universe of risks isn't really that different. It's kind of how red they're showing.
The influencer thing is an interesting one, because there are carve-outs from the regulated activity of giving advice if you publish a general article that's not aimed at anyone specific. It is just your views. But people have been fined and gone to prison for that back in the day, even under the old rules.
But it wasn't designed for people with 4 million followers on Instagram.
No, but if you have a column in the Daily Mirror or the Daily Mail, whichever one it was, that's an influence. That is a circulation. Okay. That is a following, and the classic pump and dump scheme that they were, I can say they were running because they were convicted of it. So it is what potentially we have to do as an industry, and the regulators have to get their mind around, is applying old school rules to new paradigms. And more often than not, or actually more often than one expects, applying old school rules to new paradigms actually produces the right result.
I think
so
that's. Sorry.
Sorry, guys. It does produce the right result, but I want to take us on to the Treasury Select Committee hearing, because this is what we're all dying to get into. Do we have the tools to do it? You can get the data, but if you don't have the tooling to look at the data, and you don't have the staff trained to have the right decisions made, you may not be able to oversee a digital system. So,
well,
Rachel,
that's a different discussion, though, isn't it? Because having the systems is different from having the human capital.
But it's a guns versus butter. I can throw all the people at it, or I can throw all the tech at it. But I've got to have some balance of both in my system here to control risk. Rachel, what's your perspective on what you heard from the Treasury Select Committee? What yesterday? What are some of the key takeaways?
Well, I thought one of the key takeaways is that the FCA has a lot of heavy lifting to do. Just in terms of the GameStop question, it came up briefly, and they acknowledged that they're not really focused on what these kind of investors that they characterize as younger are up to. Nikhil Rathi mentioned that they were much more focused on what older investors were doing, and as Gavin was saying before, these tend to the people who've more traditionally actually done investing, and that usually, if we accept that the people who are involved in kind of GameStop like trading were more youthful, that this would be a relatively new phenomenon in that sense. But in terms of the topic of dashboards that you were led in with, what we've found out is that this is something that the FCA is really struggling with. There's struggling to get a single view of a firm on a dashboard. Rathi mentioned that they have a manual intervention for this at the moment. And for manual, I usually read spreadsheet or PDF file. So I'm kind of imagining it as a big kind of shared document on the kind of FCA teams where you can go in and look at something. I mean, I could be, that's just my impression of it. So they're having a hard time figuring out what's happening at any given firm at any given time, which is not a surprise, given that they are looking at so many firms, and they've had problems that I outlined in a previous podcast in terms of keeping track of them on their online portal. and whatnot.
Yeah.
Part of that, I think, is the number of issues with which the FCA is either tasked to deal or feels it needs to deal with. And I've screamed into the void a number of times about the number of consultations that are out there at the moment, the number of reviews that all cross over very slightly, some of which are complementary, some of which are contradictory, all of which have different timescales, and all of which affect different bits of the handbook. If we just stopped, let everything that we have out, including the Khalifa review, play out, and we finish, and then we take stock. Because we talked last time about we've got the future regulation, financial regulation review that's going on, which may end up competing with Ian Duncan Smith MP's own consultation and review. Just let everything settle down for a second, and then we work out where the land lies.
Gavin, it's hilarious listening to those. The Treasury Select Committee asked the questions yesterday. They were all keen on head count. Do we have enough people doing supervision? But only half of the organization actually supervises from the answers they gave. I mean, you must appreciate this problem from your point of view. You know, do they have the right head count focused on the right things? And you know, do we have the data they can use?
Yeah. So I mean, I was the for disclosure, I was the FSA's head of planning for about 5 years, and I was the FCA's chief risk officer for its first couple. I mean, these sort of debates are perennial. Purely personal point of view, I don't think it's about. I don't think it's primarily a people question. Even at senior levels, I'm sure the people Nikhil Rathi's recruited in at ExCo level are great. I think if you go back over the years, you would probably say the same about the backgrounds and CVs of various generations of people coming in. The problems have remained. I don't think it's primarily a structure issue. I've said several times, I think there's been a lot of deck chair moving in the last 20 years. But to give one example, Nikhil Rathi's making authorizations an ExCo position. Well, it was an ExCo position for the first 2 years of the FCA. And then in the 2014 strategy, it was put underneath supervision, underneath retail supervision. So those things kind of just come and, they ebb and flow all the time. I think there is a data thing, which I know we're going to come on to, and systems have always been a problem ever since the FSA was created over 20 years ago with from 12, I think, predecessor organizations who all had their own ways of doing things. We talk a lot about silos. I think another way of looking at it is a sort of a group of islands, like an archipelago, and some of them have, motorway bridges between them. Some have ferries. Sometimes you need to swim across. Some of them are big, some of them are tiny. But actually making them work together in combination, linking them up, the bridges between are the really key thing in how well it works. So the dashboard thing, my own take on it is they probably have a series of perfectly good dashboards, but they tell you different things because they look at firms from different perspectives, and the problem is joining them up. So the spread, so you have, so you'll have a supervision one, you'll have an authorizations one, you'll have an enforcement one, but actually they tell you different stories.
Yeah, in my work, I've seen that these various dashboards seem to throw up different kinds of data, and one of the things that comes to mind is the operational and cyber breach data. Depending on who's crunching the numbers, you're going to get a different get a different answer to the question: how many operational resilience issues were there, or how many cyber incidents were there? And I think that's really confusing, and it kind of muddies the water in terms of.
Well, the FCA, the PRA has already recognised that, haven't they? In their review and report last week or the week before,
Yeah.
When they were talking about the quality of the data that they received, it essentially boiled down to, if a regulator asks a question, there are 6, 7, 8 ways of interpreting what it is the regulator is asking you. People will have different definitions internally within the firms of what overall lending exposure will be. And the PRA has recognized that there is an issue within the firms it supervises, that it has to consider how it asks the question. So the corollary, Rachel, is exactly what you just said, which is, well, then they should recognize that there is an internal issue about who is analyzing the data, who is asking the question. That all has to be organized in a better way.
Yeah,
what a great time to have a data collection transformation roadmap appear. It was great to see the Bank of England come out with that. I guess, Rachel, you've been tracking the data collection problem almost as long as I have. What's your view on how that whole effort's going?
Well, I read the paper yesterday, and I think I mentioned to you, PJ, that it read like a DiGiamarino greatest hits list. It all sounded eerily familiar. And when I wrote it up today, it went out. I mentioned that this is something that common data standards is something PJ has been talking about for at least 10 years. So I felt like it was really important that having common data standards is now a policy, and it will hopefully go a long way to address a lot of the issues that have been raised, and will maybe in the long run help save some money. For example, when Andrew Bailey appeared before the TSC, he mentioned that they had spent £230 million on tech projects at the FCA. And what we learned yesterday was, I'm not really sure where all that money went, because when Dame Elizabeth goes to ask the FCA for some information, one of the most embarrassing things that happened yesterday was for Charles Randall having to really acknowledge how difficult that process was, pulling out data, finding it. It just seems to be that, to Gavin's comparison with the archipelago, not all the data is flowing around in a way that's useful or even discoverable at the FCA. And I know this is a problem for firms because they get fined for it all the time.
They have a problem with single view of the customer, don't they? I mean, this is it's not unique, is it, to the regulator?
And guys, we've got to move to our summary question. It's amazing how quickly this all runs. But I guess Gavin, I'd like to start with you in terms of what's your one big so what out of all this. We've had roaring kitties, milk prices, common data standards, operational excellence. What does it all mean for risk managers and what they have on their dashboards?
So I think the biggest thing, and I think this applies to firms as well as regulators, is where do we strike the balance between competition, risk, innovation, choice on the one hand, and consumer protection on the other. It came up a lot yesterday. It came up a lot in the GameStop hearings. Sam will go on about the wholesale retail split. Nick O'Reilly went on about you could self-certify as a sophisticated investor with a kind of 250K threshold. In other countries, it was 2.5 million, but at the same time, we had higher standards of consumer protection that we expected. And for me, the two have just become too contradictory. So I think firms, regulators need to work out where they actually sit on that spectrum.
Thanks for that, Sam.
I completely agree with what Gavin just said, and the follow-up to that is we collectively need to work out how disruptive or new technologies and new businesses fit within the perimeter of the regulation. Just because it's new doesn't mean that it isn't covered by one of the old school rules. And I think there's a mindset, and albeit that it's a fantastic and entrepreneurial mindset that the Khalifa Review highlights and makes, makes a lot of, and we should be proud of the fintech industry in this country. There's, if you want to be in that industry, you have to recognize that you are part of an old school ecosystem, and potentially what you are doing is going to be a regulated activity, or might just bump up against being a regulated activity. Certainly the people to whom you're selling your products and services will be regulated. So for goodness sake, recognize that when you go in, and don't throw your hands in the air in horror when someone says, please, could you provide me with your disaster recovery plan, please? Or I would like to see the underlying change management procedure for your code.
Thank you. And I'm sure legal advice is all part of that, what they need to take up front.
Heaven forfend, really?
Yeah, just by the way.
Yes,
not for nothing. Rachel, you don't charge in 6-minute increments. What's your advice?
Yeah, I've forgotten that.
I wanted to draw a line between what Nikhil Rathi was saying yesterday about the problems they have tackling fraud and the work that they've been doing with Google to try and tamp down fraud on that end.
That was really interesting yesterday.
Yeah. And draw a line between that and this emerging issue, potential market abuse and market manipulation that we are having coming from the Reddits and the influencer sphere. If we've had so much trouble managing online fraud in the, as what she was calling a financial crime in the UK, imagine how difficult it is going to be as these influencers and bloggers continue to grow online, because they've been given a outlet to express their views financially through the neo brokers, through the cheap access to stock trading and binary options and contracts for difference and whatnot. That's going to be another really challenging area to manage and monitor and just figure out how to deal with it. And just to go back to 2 points that Sam made, one is about the old school rules, and that's something that came up at Econ. Mayur said, listen, this is, if you're doing this is market abuse. And then just one last thing about what Sam was saying about, let's kind of keep concentrated. I mean, in the middle of all of this, the FCA has just launched a consultation onto prepaid funeral plans. I mean, surely that could be put on the side. And let's figure out some other stuff.
It's just incredible, isn't it? We've been doing this a month, and look at what's come on the agenda already. So I'm really glad we're doing RegCast, and thank you guys for plugging away at it with us. We've got a whole new set of RegCasts coming up. We're going to continue to look at democratized finance. We're going to look at this data collection 2.0 based on what the Bank of England just released. And we're also going to look at the post-trade revolution, because I think there's a lot going on there. We didn't get to talk about T+1 today. I thought somebody might sneak it in. But anyway, great. Thank you very, very much for your contributions, guys. Great job as ever. And thank you very much to our listeners. Please subscribe. If you hit the button on whatever platform you use, we'll magically find our way into your device or bedroom. Anyway, take care. We will catch up with you soon.
You can download the podcast via Spotify, Apple, and Google. But also, I'd encourage people to come to the JWG website, which, as hopefully you will know, is jwg-it.eu. Go to the Intelligence Hub and create your bespoke library.